There's a moment that happens when a house is too quiet for most people. But for some men over 60, it's the first breath of real air they've taken in decades. No drama, no performance, no emotional labor disguised as conversation. Just silence, just peace, just the relief of being home, alone, with no one asking anything from them. To outsiders, it looks like loneliness. They see a lack of movement, a lack of voices, and they assume something is missing. But internally, it's something closer to sanctuary. These men aren't avoiding life. They're safeguarding the quiet truth inside them, the one they spent years trying to explain and finally stopped defending. Yet most people never see the real reason behind this, because after a certain age, the nervous system doesn't recover from emotional turbulence the way it used to. The body keeps score, and for men who've spent decades navigating relationships, careers, expectations, the cost of partnership starts to outweigh the comfort. Some philosophers understood this centuries ago, that sensitivity to pain increases with age, and that solitude becomes the only honest refuge for those who've lived long enough to know the difference between connection and exhaustion. Stay with me. There's something important hidden beneath this. What most people never notice is that the body remembers everything. Every argument that ended in silence, every conversation that required a performance, every dinner where the effort to engage felt heavier than the meal itself. The nervous system doesn't forget. It accumulates. It holds on to the micro-stresses of decades, the forced smiles, the nodded agreements when you wanted to scream, the constant, low-level hum of managing someone else's emotional state. And somewhere around 60, for many men, the math changes, not because they stopped caring, but because the cost of caring became too high. Arthur Schopenhauer wrote about this in the 19th century, long before modern psychology caught up. He observed that as we age, our sensitivity to pain sharpens while our capacity to endure it weakens. The same social friction that felt manageable at 30 becomes unbearable at 60. It's not bitterness, it's biology. The nervous system that once recovered from conflict in hours now takes days. The emotional energy required to navigate another person's moods, expectations, needs, it doesn't replenish the way it used to. Think about the last time you were in a crowded room, or perhaps a family gathering that dragged on too long. You might have felt a physical weight pressing on your chest, a fog in your mind. That wasn't just boredom. That was your battery draining faster than it could charge. And for men who've spent decades in relationships, careers, social obligations, there comes a point where the body simply says, enough, not through words, through exhaustion, through the relief they feel when plans cancel, through the peace they discover in an empty house, through the clarity that arrives only in silence. To the outside world, this looks like withdrawal. They call it isolating. They worry you're becoming a hermit. But internally, it's the opposite. It's the first honest breath after decades of holding it in. It is the reclaiming of your own oxygen. Let me tell you about someone I know. He's 64, retired, lives alone in a small house with a dog and a garden he tends every morning. For most of his life, he did what was expected. He married. He worked. He showed up to dinners, holidays, gatherings. He performed the role of the social man because that's what men were supposed to do. He was the provider, the listener, the rock. But somewhere in his late 50s, something shifted. It wasn't a dramatic event. No betrayal, no crisis, no shouting match that ended it all. It was quieter than that. He noticed that after every social interaction, even pleasant ones, he felt drained. Not tired. Drained, like something essential had been pulled out of him and wouldn't come back for days. He would come home from a dinner party, sit in his car in the driveway, and just stare at the garage door for 10 minutes, just to delay the moment of going inside and having to speak again. At first, he thought he was depressed. He went to a doctor. The doctor suggested antidepressants, therapy, more social engagement. You need to get out more, they said. Connection is the cure. But none of that felt right, because the problem wasn't that he felt bad. The problem was that he felt nothing. Nothing when friends called, nothing when invitations arrived, nothing but a low-grade dread at the thought of having to show up and be present. He started declining invitations, not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. He started experiencing JOMO, the joy of missing out, long before he knew there was a name for it. And the strangest thing happened. He didn't feel lonely. He felt relief. The guilt came later. The voice that said he should want company, that something must be wrong with him for preferring his own silence, that he was becoming one of those men. But the relief was louder, and eventually he stopped apologizing for it. Now, when people ask if he's lonely, he smiles and says no, because he's not. He's home. He's safe. He's free. And for the first time in decades, he's not performing for anyone. His mornings are slow, coffee in the same chair, the dog at his feet, light coming through the window in a way that feels almost sacred. He watches the dust motes dance in the sunbeams and realizes that this simple, unhurried existence is enough. No one to impress, no one to explain himself to, no one waiting for him to be anything other than what he is in that moment. To most people, this would feel empty. They would rush to fill the silence with a podcast, a phone call, a television show. To him, it feels like oxygen. He waters the garden. He reads. He sits in silence and watches the light change across the walls. And in those moments, he's not lonely. He's finally himself. There's something Schopenhauer understood about human nature that most people still resist today. He believed that life is suffering, not as a pessimistic complaint, but as an observable fact. And the primary source of that suffering is what he called the will, the endless drive toward desire, attachment, need. When you want something, you suffer until you get it. When you get it, you suffer trying to keep it. When you lose it, you suffer again. Partnership, for many men, becomes an endless cycle of this. The desire to connect, the effort to maintain, the fear of losing, the exhaustion of trying. And at some point, the body makes a calculation. It asks, is this worth it? And for some men, after decades of trying, the answer is no. Not because they don't value love, but because they value peace more. And peace, Schopenhauer argued, only comes when the will is quieted, when desire stops demanding, when you stop needing something outside yourself to feel whole. That's not loneliness, that's sovereignty. This is where everything becomes clearer, because what Schopenhauer understood, and what modern culture still resists, is that peace is not the absence of connection. It's the absence of conflict. And for many men over 60, partnership has become synonymous with conflict. Not because they hate women, not because they're bitter or broken, but because the nervous system can no longer afford the cost. Every relationship requires negotiation, compromise, emotional labor, the constant calibration of moods, needs, expectations. You have to track the other person's state. Are they happy? Are they quiet? Did I say the wrong thing? And when you're young, that feels like love. It feels like the necessary work of building a life. But when you're older, it feels like work. Work that never ends. Work that drains more than it gives. Work that leaves you exhausted in your own home. The place that should be your refuge becomes another stage, another performance, another place where you can't fully breathe. And eventually, the body refuses. Not through conscious decision, through collapse, through the relief that floods in when you're finally alone, through the peace that only arrives in silence, through the clarity that comes when no one is asking anything from you. This isn't about hating people. It's about protecting what's left. Because after 60, your resources aren't infinite anymore. Your energy doesn't bounce back the way it used to. Your sleep is lighter. Your patience is thinner. Your capacity to absorb other people's emotional weather has worn down to almost nothing. And you've learned, sometimes the hard way, that that most people take more than they give. Not maliciously, just naturally, because that's what relationships do. They require, they demand, they pull. And when you're young, you have enough to give. You have a surplus. But when you're older, you don't. You are operating on a reserve tank, so you stop giving. And the world calls that cold. But you know it's just honest. Schopenhauer lived this truth. He spent most of his adult life alone in a small apartment in Frankfurt. He had a poodle named Atma, which means world soul in Sanskrit. He ate lunch at the same restaurant every day at the same table. He avoided social gatherings. He had few friends. To the people around him, his life looked sad, empty, lonely. But to him, it was full of thought, full of work, full of peace. He understood something that takes most people a lifetime to learn, that the quality of your inner life matters more than the quantity of your social connections. And that for some people, especially those with rich inner worlds, solitude isn't deprivation, it's oxygen. He wrote that we forfeit 3/4 of ourselves in order to be like other people, and he believed that the happiest fate is to have an inner life so rich that you need little from the outside world. This wasn't philosophy for him, it was survival. And for men over 60 who've spent decades trying to be what others expected, this wisdom arrives not as theory, but as lived experience. The relief of no longer performing, the freedom of no longer explaining, the peace of no longer needing validation from people who will never understand. This quiet shift is happening all over the world, though no one talks about it openly. Men in their 60s and 70s, choosing solitude not as a last resort, but as a deliberate act of self-care, protecting their energy, guarding their peace, refusing to apologize for it. Before we continue, let's pause for a moment. If this resonates with you, if you've ever felt the relief of being alone and then the guilt that follows, you're not broken, you're here. And this quiet corner of the internet exists for people like you. Join this space. Share in the comments what part of this landed deepest, because what comes next will make even more sense if you stay with me. Let's continue. Let me speak directly to you. If you're a man over 60 who feels more alive alone than in company, you already know what I'm talking about. You've spent decades trying to explain it, trying to justify why you'd rather stay home than go to dinner, why you feel relief when someone cancels plans, why the idea of another relationship feels less like opportunity and more like obligation, and you've probably been told you're depressed, or isolating, or giving up. But here's what no one says out loud. You're not giving up. You're choosing. You're choosing peace over performance, clarity over chaos, your own company over half-hearted connection. And that's not weakness, that's wisdom. Because you've lived long enough to know the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the ache of wanting connection and not having it. It is a hunger. Solitude is the peace of not needing it. It is a fullness. And after decades of navigating relationships, careers, expectations, your nervous system has finally learned what it needs to survive. Quiet, space, freedom. Not because you hate people, but because you've learned that most people cost more than they give. And at this stage of life, your resources are finite. Your time, your energy, your emotional bandwidth. You can't afford to spend them on people who drain you. You can't afford to invest in conversations that go nowhere or relationships that require you to suppress your true nature, so you don't. And the world calls that selfish. But you know better. You know that protecting your peace isn't selfish, it's survival. You know that choosing solitude isn't giving up. It's finally being honest about what you need. You know that the relief you feel when you're alone isn't a sign of brokenness. It's a sign that you've finally stopped pretending. Here's what the data shows. Stress raises blood pressure. Emotional turbulence disrupts sleep. Anxiety affects digestion, heart health, mental clarity. For men over 60, these aren't abstract concepts. They're daily realities. Every argument is a spike in cortisol. Every tense conversation is a night of poor sleep. every relationship conflict is a measurable threat to physical health. The body doesn't lie. And for men who've spent decades managing other people's emotions, the body eventually says, no more. Not through conscious decision, through exhaustion, through the relief they feel when they're alone, through the peace they discover in their own company, through the clarity that only arrives in silence. This isn't avoidance, it's survival, and it's not just psychological, it's biological. The nervous system that once recovered from conflict in hours now takes days. The emotional reserves that used to replenish overnight now take weeks. And partnership, with all its demands, negotiations, compromises, becomes too expensive. Not because love isn't valuable, but because peace is more valuable. And after 60, most men have finally learned that peace doesn't come from another person. It comes from the absence of conflict. It comes from mornings where no one is upset, from evenings where no one needs anything, from nights where the only sound is your own breathing. It comes from the freedom to exist without explanation. There's a scene that happens in the evening, in houses all over the world. A man sits alone in a room lit only by the last light of the day. No television, no phone, just silence. To an outsider, it might look sad. But to him, it's the most honest moment of his day. No one is asking him to be anything. No one is disappointed. No one needs him to perform. He's just there, breathing, existing, free. And in that moment, he's not lonely. He's home. The light fades slowly. The room grows darker, and he doesn't move to turn on a lamp. Because this moment, this quiet, unwitnessed moment, is more real than any conversation he's had in years. This is what people don't understand when they ask if he's lonely. They think loneliness is the absence of people. But for him, loneliness was the presence of the wrong people, the performance, the pretending, the constant effort to be something he wasn't. Now, alone, he's finally himself. And that's not loneliness, that's freedom. Schopenhauer wrote that we can be ourselves only as long as we are alone, and whoever does not love solitude will not love freedom, for it is only when we are alone that we are really free. This wasn't abstract philosophy, it was lived wisdom. And for men over 60, it's the truth they've earned through decades of trying to be someone they weren't. So if you're a man over 60 who feels more at peace alone than in partnership, know this: you're not broken. You're not cold. You're not giving up on life. You're keeping your emotional world untouched by noise. And that's not something to apologize for. That's something to honor. Because you've lived long enough to know what most people never learn, that the best company you'll ever have is your own. And the deepest peace you'll ever feel comes not from finding the right person, but from no longer needing to find anyone at all. You've earned this peace. You've paid for it with decades of trying, with years of compromise, with countless nights of going to bed exhausted from the effort of being someone you weren't. And now, finally, you're free. Free to wake up slowly. Free to spend your day however you choose. Free to go to bed without explaining yourself to anyone. This is what Schopenhauer meant when he said that happiness is not something we achieve, but something we stop preventing. For years, you prevented your own peace by trying to fit into a life that didn't fit you. And now, you've stopped. You've stopped trying. You've stopped pretending. You've stopped apologizing. And in that stopping, you've found something most people spend their whole lives searching for. Peace, real peace. The kind that comes from within. The kind that doesn't need anyone else's approval. The kind that exists in the silence of your own home, in your own company, in your own breath. But here's the part most people miss. Choosing peace over partnership doesn't mean the loneliness disappears. It just changes shape. Because even men who love their solitude sometimes wake up at 3 a.m. and wonder, did I make the right choice? Is this peace? Or is this just giving up? And that question, that quiet doubt that arrives in the dark, is what we'll explore in the next conversation. because the line between solitude and isolation is thinner than most people think, and knowing which side you're on might be the most important thing you ever figure out. A quiet corner of the internet for people who choose solitude over half-hearted connections.